Welcome to English Country Life and welcome to the October episode of our series, The Chicken Year Month by Month. As you can see, autumn is well and truly upon us, so come and join us. Welcome, my name's Fiona and together with my husband Hugh we breed large fowl Buff Orpington chickens here in our small holding homestead in South Lincolnshire in the UK. Now in this series we cover various aspects of general chicken keeping and various things we're doing with our Buff Orpington flock through the breeding process, and we follow that month by month. In October we've got quite a lot going on. We've got two remaining brood hens who are called Marshmallow and Licorice who have chicks, and they're in the process of making those chicks independent. So I'm going to show you how they're going about that so that you can be prepared if you're facing the same thing. In our second segment I'm going to be showing you actually what we're doing to separate Marshmallow out, because she's actually crossed a little bit of a line and we've decided it's best to separate her from the chicks completely. Now the technique we're using with Marshmallow to get her to adopt a brand new coop is very similar to one that anyone who is wanting to integrate hens into a new flock would use to get those new hens to adopt a coop. So I'm going to take you through that and it will be useful to you whether you're breeding chickens or for general chicken keeping. We're then going to have a look at moulting, because now that we're into autumn, this is the time of year where moulting will start to happen with most adult chickens. And if you're a first-time chicken keeper, it can be daunting. And the amount of panicky notes I get from people at this time of year saying, my chicken's losing all of its feathers, what's wrong with it, is really phenomenal. So I'm going to take you through that process and actually show you as well what you can do to support your hens during that time. And then finally I'm going to take you through some options should flockdown happen again in the UK. And that's because in the last 2 winters we have had restrictions, housing restrictions imposed on all chicken keepers, where we've had a legal obligation to keep our hens either indoors or in fully netted enclosures. Now there's no date announced, so don't panic, but it's a good time to start preparing to think about what you might do or what you could do should flockdown restrictions happen. But let's get started and have a look at that process that Marshmallow is going through to make the chicks independent. Back in our August episode you would have seen Licorice and her chick Uno joining Marshmallow and her 2 chicks Doss and Tress in their coop. Now for a few weeks this was a very calm group, with the brood hens and the chicks all getting along very well. Once chicks are old enough to look after themselves, it's normal for a brood hen to force chicks to be independent. This would include no longer calling them over for food, generally ignoring them, and at roosting time chasing them away from the coop. Uno is now at that age. The strange thing is that Licorice is her brood hen, and she played the part of a broodie who was no longer interested in Uno being around. But it was actually Marshmallow who decided that Uno should no longer be allowed to sleep in the coop. The good news for us is that Licorice and Marshmallow are roosting in one of our Nestera coops, where we have a Nestera coop camera in place so we can spy on the action and make sure things are not getting out of hand. What you can expect at this stage is that a brood hen may either abandon the coop it's in and their chicks to go back to the coop where the chicken at the top of the pecking order sleeps. But in this case, Licorice is at the top of the pecking order, so Marshmallow is already in her coop. And as a result, Marshmallow makes it clear to Uno that Uno has to be the one to leave. Although it does look violent, Marshmallow is pecking towards Uno. She is pecking, but in no way is that anything other than shocking to Uno, and at no point is Uno being harmed. If Marshmallow wanted to harm Uno, she could. So we are assured that in this case, this is a normal process for the chicks. But don't worry about Uno. Uno's got plenty of choice of coops to sleep in. There's lots of other coops that have got older youngsters inside, and Uno just wanders around to the nearest coop, goes inside and beds down for the night, and the older youngsters welcome him with open arms. There's no issues. In the last clip you would have seen Marshmallow having a go at Uno. Now that's all part of the standard growing up process for a chick of Uno's age. However, Marshmallow then made the behaviour worse. Marshmallow started having a go at little Trez, and this is a step too far for us.
It's not because Marshmallow is harming Trez, because she's not. Trez is just frightened by Marshmallow trying to get him to leave the coop. But with the weather getting colder, we decided to intervene, as Doz and Trez were only just 4 weeks old. At this age, it's unlikely they'll be accepted by the older youngsters, and they are not old enough to have a full covering of feathers, nor are they able to regulate their own temperatures without a brood hen.
Trez is significantly younger than Uno, and we cannot allow that kind of behaviour. So what have we done about it? Well, this is what we've done. We've actually cordoned off an area of the field, and Marshmallow is now in this section. And what we're trying to do is stop Marshmallow going back to the coop that she was in and make her adopt a completely different coop. Now at the same time, we've got Nugget and Taffy, who really ought to be coming away from their coops because they're with youngsters who are now 14 weeks old. They're not trying to keep them warm, they are just in those coops because they're part of that little group flock. So what we're trying to do is get those adults that are staying with us over winter to come to our winter quarter coop for the adults. And this fence is doing the job for us. Now don't panic, I know this is electric poultry fencing, but it's not electrified. The only thing this fence is doing at the moment is separating out the main field from an area where the 3 adults, Nugget, Taffy and Marshmallow, are actually being kept at the moment. And in here they've got access to a shelter, they've got access to the water, to food. They've also got one coop, and that's the winter quarters coop. So when they go to roost at night, they have no choice but to use that coop. Now, chickens are creatures of habit, and what we're trying to do is create a new habit in them. So while their habit up until now has to be to sleep in other coops, we want them to adopt the winter coop. So the idea is 5 to 7 days should be long enough for them to adopt that coop. Now where would you use this? Because you may not have the same circumstances, but there are lots of circumstances where you may want to get chickens to move from one area to another, and you can use this technique. For example, if you're introducing new youngsters to your existing flock, you might have them in quarters separate from the main flock for a while the flock get used to them. But at a point in time you're going to want to merge them all together. Now what you could do is just remove the coop that they were sleeping in, but it might be better to cordon an area off and leave the coop where it was, then you don't have to worry about storage. And that forces the youngsters to go into that new coop. So this is one technique that we're using at the moment. Now today is actually day 5 of the process, and what I'm going to do is going to be taking this fence away. So let's see how successful it is, whether the 3 adults go into the main coop or whether they return to their old habits with the youngsters in their coops.
They were in and out of the coop, which is normal for this group of adults, and Nugget needed some encouragement to go into the coop, but she's always last in. All in all, it's enough for us to decide not to put the dividing fence back up.
October is a month that you'll see a lot of moulting in your flock, and moulting actually is the time of year when you may get what we call a catastrophic molt with some of your adult hens, but don't panic, it's completely natural. A lot of people think it's counterintuitive for hens to lose their feathers, which is essentially what moulting is, and replace them with brand new feathers when the weather is turning colder. But if you think about it, it's not the coldest part of the year. They're making use of the last of the late summer sun and the early autumn sun to replace their old worn out feathers with brand new robust, really beautiful feathers, which which are more likely to keep them warm during the very, very cold winter months. So it does make more sense. Now let me just show you some images of what a catastrophic molt looks like.
This is Gannet, and she started to lose her feathers gradually on her head, then neck, followed by her body. She's looking a little moth-eaten in this film, but on her neck you can see what are called pin feathers. These are actually the feather shaft of new feathers as they grow from her skin. The new feather will emerge from these pin feathers. Every chicken molts slightly differently, and this is Lightning, a copper black Marans. Her molts meant she would lose clumps of feathers, and as you can see, she's got a great big bald patch on her chest. But I think the most dramatic molt belonged to Trouble, one of our cream leg busts from a few years ago, and as you can see, she looks very sorry for herself. But very quickly, she replaced all of those old worn out feathers with brand new ones.
And as you can see, the area I'm stood in is actually covered with lots and lots of feathers, and that's because this is where our chickens tend to sunbathe. They have actually destroyed all of the grass under this cherry tree, and that's because it's incredibly dry, because the cherry tree actually uses all the moisture. But because they use it to sunbathe, they filled it with their feathers, which they're discarding at the moment. So it does look a little bit like a chicken's exploded, but it is that natural molting process. Now there are other reasons why chickens start to molt. You can have a lower grade of molting, not like the catastrophic one you see in autumn, and that may be because they have brooded, they have been ill, they have been under stress. So anything essentially which puts stress on your chicken's body will probably result in some kind of molt, probably just a little one. But I do have a video on the subject up above which you can look at to give much more information on the subject. The next question is, what can you do to support your chickens through this time period? Because if you are concerned that they're getting colder, you can actually do various things to support them. Now the worst thing you can do is put some kind of garment on them. So please, please, please do not put chicken saddles on them. Don't put knitted jackets on them. Don't put any kind of jacket on them at all, please. And that's because those feather shafts, as they emerge from the skin, which create the pin feathers, if any pressure is actually put on them, it's like sticking a needle into their body. So it is actually quite uncomfortable for them. It is quite painful. And actually during that time period, you should avoid picking up the chickens too, because that as well could put pressure on them. Clearly, if you're doing health checks, there are reasons superseding that, which means that you may want to pick them up. But if you can avoid it, please do that. So how can you support them during that time period? Well, you can actually do other things to raise their body temperature. Dried maize kibble does increase a chicken's body temperature because it uses a lot more energy to actually digest the food, which in a short term raises that temperature. So you can get a treat called mixed corn, which is a mix of dried maize kibble, whole wheat and something like dried split peas, and that is a really good treat just before they go into roost to help raise their body temperature overnight in the coop. Another thing you could do is put in a hot water bottle wrapped in a towel. Now the towel means that the chickens are protected from getting too close to something which is hot, but it also means that the hot water bottle is more likely to stay warm for a lot longer. Now that doesn't take any electricity or cause you to make arrangements to get plugs down to your coop. But if you want to be a little bit more sophisticated and you are able to put an electricity supply into the coop, you can add a brooder plate or a heating plate, which is available in countries such as the US. But in the UK, you could put your brooder plate in there, which will add some ambient heat to the coop and keep the chickens warmer. But don't panic, molting is a very natural process. So why am I stood in this part of the chicken field where all the other chickens are up the other end? I'm stood here because we need to talk about avian influenza. Now in the UK for the last 2 winters we have had something we've called flockdown, and essentially it's a legal requirement to keep our chickens either inside or under fully netted enclosures. Now the restrictions, we don't know whether it's going to happen again this year, and we don't know when it would start if it comes into play. But if you've not been through it before, now is a good time to actually think about, if you have to keep them indoors or in a fully netted enclosure, what kind of arrangements could you put in place? And what I want to do is just talk you through some options. And I'll show you what we've done first, what our arrangements are, and then show you some other options which you could consider. And this is what we've got. These are actually cheap polytunnel structures. These hoops in total give us a space of 21 metres long by 3 metres wide. And the good thing about this structure is we have other uses for it. They're actually the cheapest polytunnel structures on the market. And if you're interested in them, there's a link in the description down below in our Amazon store. So have a look at that. Now you can see behind me, one of them has got the polythene cover on it at the moment, and that's because it's still got our tomatoes in there. Now as soon as lockdown happens, whether those tomatoes are finished or not, all of them are going to come out, and actually I think in the next 2 weeks they'll be finished, so it's not going to be a problem. But we'll take all the tomatoes out, take the polythene cover off, and then net the entire area over. Then we just need to move in 2 coops, one for the Orpingtons and one for the Crested Cream leg bars and Pumpkin Noel Summer. And that will be us sorted. Now clearly 21 metres by 3 metres wide isn't like their field. They're not going to have access to grass like they did before. But we will be legally compliant, and this is one option for you. So let's have a look at some other options. If you've got a greenhouse, that may be a good option for you. The growing space probably isn't in as much use over winter, so if you can put your chickens in there, it's not a bad idea at all. But there's a couple of things to be aware of, and ventilation is the first one, because clearly you need some airflow for your chickens. So leaving the door open a little bit or propping open the ventilation shutters at the top is a good idea. However, the other thing to consider there is, can wild birds get in? Because if you are opening the door a bit, or you're opening the ventilation at the top, you need to ensure that wild birds can't fly in. So putting a little bit of netting around that area is what you'll need to do. Now if you actually close the windows at the top but prop the doors open, have those doors open, it'll be easier to put a netting screen behind the doors. And as you can see here, there is a fine fly netting screen behind this door, so that actually does the job. It stops wild birds flying in, and it keeps them beautifully warm if we choose to put the chickens inside. So that may be another option for you. This may not look like a building, but trust me, it is. It's actually our log shed. But if we didn't have logs in it, we could use this as a potential option. So do you have a log shed? Do you have a carport? Do you have a shed? All of those, should the housing restrictions come in for the chickens, would be compliant. All we would need to do with this is put some kind of netting screen over the front, and that actually would be compliant with the restrictions, and have chickens in here, not logs for our fireplace. You might be wondering what I'm actually doing standing in the garden. Well, I want to demonstrate probably the cheapest solution. So you may be in the situation that actually buying a polytunnel structure is just not going to happen. You don't have a shed, you don't have a suitable building like a greenhouse where you could house the chickens. So you want a really, really cheap, simple solution. And this is probably the cheapest. So for the cost of a washing line and some bird netting, you can make a fully netted enclosure for your chickens. So all you need to do is be able to string a washing line between a tree and another tree, or a tree and a post, or 2 posts, and then throw some bird netting over the top, peg it out as far as you can, and then peg up the ends together. You can make a fully netted enclosure, and that is probably the cheapest way of meeting the legal requirements. Now I do have to say, at the time of filming, we do not have a requirement in the UK for lockdown to keep our chickens either inside or a fully netted enclosure. The purpose of this segment is really to say it's worth thinking about what you might want to do. But if in the cost of living crisis money is an issue and you don't have a suitable structure, this may be the most cost-effective way of keeping your chickens legally compliant.
In our August episode, you would have seen a young chick who was actually injured. And I'm happy to give you an update to say that Limpy Chick, as we called her, because of clearly she had a limp, after 2 weeks of rest, she was fully recovered. In fact, she's so well recovered, she's actually gone to a new home, and her buyers love her.
There you have it. That's October in a nutshell, and hopefully the moulting section is the most useful to you. But if you do have any questions for me which haven't been answered in this video, just leave them in the comments below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. If you have liked this content, please take a moment and give me a thumbs up down below. And if you're not already a subscriber, hit subscribe and the bell icon. It's a completely free process and you can get to know of every new video as soon as it goes live. But for now, thanks for watching and we look forward to seeing you next time.